Hello everyone, welcome to our annual STEAM Summit, where we're looking through and deconstructing what STEAM in education means, how you can use it in your classroom, and how we can better achieve a STEAM school initiative. During our presentation today, we'll hear from some industry and educational experts that are nearby and that we can access for further information. These experts are going to look through their own experiences, their own knowledge, and give us a bit of a toolkit for what we can take away for our classrooms. So please sit back, listen to our presenters, see what they've got to present to us, have an explore of the software and the ideas that they're working through. And please discuss with your KLA how you might be able to use these strategies going forward. Please don't hesitate to send me any questions that you have. Thanks everyone, and enjoy the presentation.
Go to slido.com, or you can scan the QR code, type in that number, and then you'll be able to submit questions to me, see what other people have put forward as questions, and give them a thumbs up if you think that's an important question for me to address. This is a poll question that I'm going to put out to you. It'll give me a chance to get a bit of an insight into your perspectives as well. Oh, sweet, we've got some contributions. Nice, it's working. This is me, Daniel McCusker. That's my email address. Please feel free to get in touch if you have any questions after today. So I actually started off in theatre, 70 productions as an independent theatre maker, performing, directing, producing, that sort of stuff. I can often bring to the work that I do the perspective of somebody who worked in a creative industry. But after a while I moved out of theatre, mostly because of a lack of work in Canberra, and moved sort of sideways into science communication. So I started off working at the top end science fair for CSIRO, wrote some articles for the CSIRO publication Scientific and Healing. And then I worked at Questacon, which is the National Science and Technology Centre, where we worked with schools and toured innovation workshops. That's how it was sort of framed. 90-minute workshops into regional schools. So we did a bunch of those tours. We also ran in-house stuff, maker-spacey kind of things, innovation challenges, creative problem solving, engineering challenges, a lot of that sort of stuff. And now I work at ScienceWorks and Melbourne Planetarium. Since starting as a science communicator, I've moved a little bit again into sort of maker stuff. So I run a makerspace, that's how I earn my main income at Casey Tech School. 3D printers, with laser engraving. I think the next school workshop I'm running is going to be on creating acrylic decorations, so focusing on trying to create key rings and earrings and that sort of stuff. But I also really like to emphasize collaboration. I think that's something that can often get a little bit lost. The kind of goal of what I'm going to try and address is what are some ways that I have seen impactful integrated STEAM programs. So there's things that are sort of interdisciplinary and what they've achieved from my perspective. STEM in particular gets used a lot, and it's, it's a buzzword. And in fact, I'm going to put some scare quotes around it because I've found that it really doesn't have a consistent understanding. And in fact, it's used and it means different things to different groups in a really meaningful sort of way. So from a government perspective, and I've worked, in a federal government position working on STEM programs. The government's really concerned about skills shortages. These kind of whole industry, whole of economy levers. So STEM to them is about, what things can they promote to make sure that we've got future prosperity in Australia. Scientists, though, mostly don't particularly care about the term STEM. In the interest of trying to break down the monolith, I asked my housemate, who is a scientist, a data scientist, what STEM and STEAM meant to him. And his answer was, when we take the A out of STEAM and make it STEM, when we separate the kind of humanities, then he sees that resulting in generations of scientists that aren't very good at communicating their expertise out. And certainly there's been a lot of promotions and effort in science communication to try and fix that. Which brings us to the next group, which is science communicators. That's the group I'm in. This group of people who, that's a photo of me up in my Questacon days. I think the thing that science communicators really worry about is public distrust in science. STEM and STEAM, they're just these kind of categories. But most science communicators, most of the money is from programs that focus on schools. A lot of outreach is targeted at kids. Questacon, ScienceWorks, they're often considered to be kids' places. And so STEM initiatives are often kind of tightly focused, because that's where the money is, onto education. So I think that's a bit of an issue. But tech schools, I'm not going to dwell on this at length. I work for one. You'll be speaking to somebody who represents your local tech school soon. But they're in this really good position where they're kind of trying to balance all these different stakeholders. They're supposed to be working with schools and with tertiary institutions and with industry, and then actually somehow connecting with teenagers. That's a lot. That's a lot to try and balance. But at schools, you folks, schools and teachers and other staff there, my perspective, having worked with and side by side with a lot of teachers and schools, is that often the main focus is just struggling to get through the curriculum, to manage sometimes rampant disengagement from students, to try and save off staff burnout, Schools and teachers aren't a monolith. I'm not sure of the specifics in your school, but I've found that often teachers and schools can be quite siloed off. Either in the classroom, the teacher's sort of out of touch with the other teachers working in the school, or even just within a school, the certain culture of that school can be vastly different to the school just down the road. And I think this sense of isolation can be exacerbated when the resources are stretched thin. And so then STEM initiatives come out of the blue, and often it just feels to the teachers I've spoken to like there's a big line being drawn in the sand, like, oh, you do a humanities subject, no funding for you, and that they're somehow disadvantaging non-STEM subjects. And I think this is a big issue. It's certainly a prevalent attitude that I've seen, but I really, it's one of my passions at the tech school is talking to English teachers who come through and trying to excite them about the things that we could do that would be relevant to their subject. To quickly touch on was community, like the actual community itself. And the big issue there is that we've got a lot of tribalism, right? There's groups that are interested in science and STEM and STEAM, but they're usually already interested in what they're interested in and they tend to stay that way. So Story Smash is based around interactive fiction. So some of you might remember the old Choose Your Own Adventure book. Read page 1 and then at the bottom it will give you some choice and you turn to page 36 or to page 75. There's also modern versions of that. On the right hand side we've got, they're called visual novels, and this is the same thing. It's basically a narrative, it's basically a story, but there's some element of choice. Story Smash was a program that used interactive fiction. I was in Nottingham in the UK. I was lucky enough to go and work there for 10 days on a placement between the local library service, the local government, a bunch of schools, and a museum they have there called the National Video Game Arcade. The question that was presented to the students was, who wants to make a video game? A lot of people were interested. They ran 73 workshops for young people in the first 12 months. So you got a lot of buy-in. Now the platform that's used to do this was a platform called Twine. It's free, it's open source, it runs from a browser window if you need to. It's often a real consideration of mine that you can run things without needing to get through difficult IT ecosystems. Some places, some schools, some government institutions have very locked down IT services, and this one you can literally just run it out of the browser window if you want. So we're going to go make games, folks. And so the kids turn up, yeah, we're making games. But actually, what most of the conversation around would probably fall more neatly into the subject areas of English, or would be kind of classified as coding. Alright, so we're running these games workshops. Cool, but you're making an interactive story, so that the kind of first consideration, what most of the time was spent talking about was, okay, what makes a good story? What makes a good game? And the students would usually say, well, good characters. And so you could then have a discussion about narrative structure. You could have a discussion about what makes for good character development. But students would start to want to put in a sort of more advanced content. You can do that, but the tools that you use to do that are basically web development tools. You can use HTML tags, you can use CSS. So they're learning actual scripting and coding skills. So let's take a step back. About this whole project though, is that one of the things that it did really well from my perspective is that it gave a voice to those who didn't have one. These programs were primarily aimed at low socioeconomic schools and at students in those schools who weren't engaging with English class. This is the workspace here. It's put one starting passage in the middle. It's called Untitled Passage, and it will say on it, double-click this passage to edit it. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. A passage is essentially a page of the Choose Your Own Adventure novel, and you can create lots of them, and you link them together with links. I'm going to give this one a different name. It's at the moment Untitled Passage. I'm going to call it Start. Double-click this passage to edit it. I'm going to start typing my story. Kathy was an 8-year-old with a pain in her mouth. Was that a new tooth? Alright, so we've got some text. If I click on the X, we can see it now says start. You can see the bit of text written out there in sort of grey. I could also hit play. Should. There we go. Pop me across. It shows me a bit of text having shown up. Nothing very exciting so far. That's one passage, but we need to link things. Now, the way that we link things in Twine is with double square brackets. So I'm going to do 2 open square brackets. And I say wiggle a loose tooth. And I'll do double close square brackets. And then it's created a new passage with the name that I gave it. You can see there's an arrow showing how the sort of story progresses from that one down to this one. And it now says double click this passage to edit it. You go in there, type in some more text, make another link, and so on and so forth. Voxel Art is a program that I've run a few times. I've run it with primary schools, I've run it with high schools, I've run it with general public audiences. Voxels are basically like pixels, but they're 3D. So the easiest thing, those of you who have seen anything in Minecraft, that's kind of the easiest way to think about it. Right, there's like blocks that get stacked up and you make some different shapes. And you can make some art out of that. I use a program called Magica Voxel. Again, it's free, it's small, you can run it off a USB drive. It runs pretty easily. And you can model things. This is a pair of headphones that I own. that I just did a model of, these ones here, you can basically make them out of blocks, and then it has a rendering engine so you can do nice looking light simulations, and here's some examples of work, so you can see the more complex stuff up the top. But then we get into a different set of skills down the bottom where it's actually about how much can you simplify an object and still have it be recognizable. And I like to, when I'm running this workshop, actually start off by printing out a bunch of these works, a dozen, maybe 2 dozen, spreading them around the room, and then asking everyone to wander around, have a look at everything, a little bit like, a makeshift gallery. And then at the end of 5 minutes, I'm going to be asking everyone to tell me about a work that affected you in some way, because you like it, because you dislike it, because you think it's interesting, because you think it's really boring, like whatever, you just need to have something to say. I want to really quickly sort of finish this thought up by sharing a really good resource for kind of exploring this letting go of control and letting students have more agency and being okay with the fact that my intended learning that they have might not be the one that they actually come away with. It's a long read, there's lots of stuff in there, but in particular there's a page here which provides a really useful taxonomy for talking about this. It sort of goes on the one end for demonstration, right? There's the presenters at one end doing something and everyone else out there is passive. That's what we got right now, right? It's didactic, I guess. Then we got the cookbook experiments, that laminated sheet of instructions, go through, follow everything else. Now the students are active, they're participating, or the participant doesn't have to be a student in a school context, but they have no control of the process or of the goal. We move on to engineering challenges, like the old, create a pasta bridge and can it stand the weight? Well, the student controls the path, like how to build that or what to build, but they don't choose the goal. And there are very strict parameters provided by the facilitator. It's open-ended inquiry. You need to use the scientific method to sort of explore, your own question. The classic sort of science fair, come up with your own little project. Now, in that case, they're able to pick their own goal, but the point is that they use a particular process that we've given them. Then you get to making. So make a fair, come up with a cool, something to share. Maybe it's a costume, maybe it's whatever. The participant is deciding their own goal and they're deciding how to get there. So we're giving it more and more control as we sort of move down this end of things. It has a risk. There is a very, very much a risk there, right? If a student wants to disengage and they're given freedom, then they might use that freedom to muck about or to undermine. But the people who do engage sometimes get a much more sense of agency, much more sense of buy-in. So it's just a question of how much risk you have an appetite for. But what I really like about this is it gives you a taxonomy to sort of describe whereabouts your ideas will fit. And then lastly, and then you've got tinkering, where we don't even have a goal. We're just going to have some stuff. Here's a microcontrollers, have a play. So that's it. Engagement is hard. It is. It's hard when I'm doing public programs engagement. I do not envy classroom teachers trying to maintain engagement with a group of students for 13 years of their life. But multidisciplinary projects, I think, can really show how one subject area has relevance to that person's interest. Oh, I like games. Yeah, cool. English and coding are relevant to you. I think STEAM programs can really help to sort of unpick some of those identity and stereotype related problems. Like, oh, I'm not an arts person, I'm not a tech person. It's like, well, nobody's born that way. We work together and you can get better at it, and it's okay. And then the last thing is letting go of power, letting go of control, and giving genuine agency to people who are doing the STEAM program can get huge buy-in and invest sometimes, if you do it right, and that's a very difficult thing to do, but very much worth exploring, I think.
I think STEAM is so valuable in our school. You can see there that students can undertake these projects in any medium. Like, I open it out to them in every possible way so they're hooked into their own learning. What it really did is it really enabled that project-based learning where students can build those really solid skills in problem solving across the disciplines, which that's the part that I found really fascinating. And also working with, a real scientist, and that cross-connection even within the school, having art and science teachers chatting together about projects is awesome. I also really loved it because it gave the students such a great opportunity to engage with ideas of their own and have that really experiential learning. They owned the learning. I was really facilitating things around them. So I never said to them, you have to do this. It was really open to their own inquiry. Another thing I think what's so great about STEAM is, using art to hook kids in. Most, kids are really engaged through art, using art mediums to learn. And I found, particularly with the group I had a really large group of girls, like 22 girls or something like that, and only a couple of boys in this group. So there was an absolute gender imbalance in this class. And what I found early on when we sort of surveyed the students is that a lot of them weren't particularly interested in science initially, and we find that in STEM club and even some science projects, we get way less girls coming to those learning sessions and extracurricular sessions that we hold. So this project was a great hooking for them. I really noticed that it allowed them to become familiar with some science ideas that they might have been interested in, or to even revisit some science idea that they'd heard of, that they could sort of revisit that idea on their own terms. That was really what stood out the most for me. You can kind of see that every student in the class undertook completely different art processes. So there were students using digital platforms, there were students, you can see, making things, sculptural projects, using oil paint, using collage. Yeah, it was kind of quite endless.
So what's the most important thing that we can do in our classroom for STEAM in our students?
I think using design thinking is really important in our classes, using that, inquiry design thinking. And also I find connecting with external bodies such as Onisha, that was really fantastic. That was a great hook in for all students. Yeah, definitely. I think that's made a lot more students interested in pursuing that pathway.
The Google Arts and Culture app is actually a really fantastic, fun way to introduce people to the blending of technology and arts. And so that feature there is just you take a selfie of yourself and it will then go through and match it up with millions and millions of artworks around the world and give you the best match. I have a Dutch heritage, so I reckon it was probably pretty good at matching it up. So it's a really good thing to try. But the Google Arts and Culture program itself is absolutely fantastic in terms of blending cloud-based technology, really good analytics and other information, and mixing it back in with the arts. So just a little bit of a fun warm-up there to get you started. So what is Yarra Ranges Tech School? As Philippa said, we've been working with many of you already in our programs. At the broadest view, the tech schools are part of the Victorian Government's initiative. Yarra Ranges Tech School is one of 10 tech schools. It's a partnership between the Department of Education and Training and Box Hill Institute. Our focus is on being in the centre of the tertiary sector, the industry sector, schools and community. It was mentioned, I caught the end of the last speaker and they were talking about design thinking. That's the underlying pedagogy that we use at the tech school. And this is the model we use. It's built on the Sanford D School model. And we take the 5 stages. So all of our programs are built around this method of human-centered design thinking. And why do we do that? We do it because it's used widely in industry. It's a fantastic tool to encourage collaboration and demonstrate to students the power of working in a team. I really like the fact that it gets students to focus on the user and gets to think about technology and all the other things that they're learning in school and might be interested in outside of school. It gets them to look at those as enablers to solve a problem for a user. And I think that that's a really important skill. So I see STEAM as being the fact that 21st century skills are not just specifically related to STEM, that industry does use multidisciplinary teams to solve challenges. And in my mind, if you look at the power of social media, of digital design and communication, they are incredibly powerful tools, incredibly important to have whenever you're looking at a challenge. These are the skill areas that I like to think we complement what you're doing in the classroom. So showing students how they can apply critical and creative thinking, showing them the importance of communication and collaboration, getting them to think about information literacy and media literacy. Several of our programs require students to manage budgets, to think about the financial side of what they're doing. And then life skills, flexibility, initiative, productivity, leadership, and social skills. So that's what we try to do. We do that through human-centered design thinking. We do that by working with industry to create real-world challenges. Design your smart farming. How can you build a sustainable house? How could you develop a game that is actually educational? These are the challenges that we're putting to students and getting them to really think about it. That's a really important thing when I talk to industry. So industry has often said to me that they have no problem getting fantastically trained electricians or biochemists or engineers. But what they do struggle with is getting people with those skills that can communicate, that they can put in front of customers, that they can send out to engage with their clients. Hence why we talk about what we do at the tech school and why we really need to look at bringing the humanities, arts, social sciences in to when we talk about STEM. Teach at the tech school is something that is available to you as teachers. It's available to you free of charge. There's no cost to send students. There's no cost for you to attend the tech school. It's a lab. And ultimately, I think that there are many teachers now amongst our partner schools that are treating the tech school as an extension of the classroom. These next 2 slides are a very high-level mapping of the Victorian curriculum. So down the sides, you've got our programs. Across the top, you've got the different strands. And you can see that across the majority of our programs, we cover all the areas. And tech schools are an incredibly powerful piece of the education state. They're something that you can access. I hope that we've demonstrated a way of developing projects that are cross-curricular at how we can embed technology in a way to show it as an enabler, not the solution. We want to raise awareness of the different pathways We want to get students to think about the fact that the ATAR is not the be-all and end-all of a secondary education, that there are a whole range of different pathways and different education and career options that will come up. I think if we want to remove some of the stigmas and we want to talk about how innovative Victoria and Australia can be, we need to be talking about STEAM rather than STEM. So I'm really happy to take questions. I'm really happy to have emails or phone calls direct from you to me. If you want to talk more generally about the tech school, you can use the admin email. Check out our website.
Started with the basics. Before we do get into Tinkercad, the first question that comes to mind is how do you use this in your classroom? If you're a maths teacher, if you're a science, you're an English teacher, how do you use this in your classroom and in your subject areas? With Tinkercad, you can design and teach students different angles, rotating on the XY axis. They can learn about parameters, dimensions, length and width. They can make shapes and they can calculate areas. For chemistry or biology, we mostly deal with models or the structures of the chemical compounds we are trying to make. So instead of having the physical ones in front of the students, or you can design these models in Tinkercad and use it for teaching. For arts classes or drama classes or English classes, they can design props or they can design a full stage in Tinkercad and explain how the actors will move around. They can put in comments, they can make a storyboard there and say, this is how the stage will look like, we need these props. You can design these props and maybe make a small video of how the props look like and then incorporate it in their presentations. Or if they go further, they can actually use the 3D printers which the textbook provides, or laser cutters, or the CNC mills we have to actually make a model or a prototype and then use it in the drama classes. Apart from that, some things I found on the internet, you can have cross-sections, look at cross-sections of the heart or the human body. There are some pre-built organs or bones in Tinkercad, which the students can have a look at. They can pull it apart, they can put it together, they can design, or they can look at all prehistoric dinosaur bones and structures that already exist in Tinkercad. Chemistry students can look at the molecules, make the designs. Geography students can make the topography and then put in houses, buildings, and planning of population areas. Graphics students can design the graphical designs in Tinkercad. If you are trying to test it out, you can make prototypes. Food technology students can design the molds for cutting cookies or making cupcakes, so they can make the molds, print it off, and have those molds to be used. Another good news is YHSC does have a food 3D printer. So if you design in Tinkercad, you can actually use the food 3D printer to print out your model, put that model on top of your cakes, and that becomes your cake topper or decorations for the cake. Given that the food 3D printer takes in any food paste that you can make. So if you have a home ec class where the students are learning how to mix ingredients, they can always mix their own ingredient and test it in the food 3D printer to see how the shapes will come out. If the shapes will retain the 3D shape, or if the ingredients are too soft like tomato sauce, they may not retain the 3D shape, but they can be used for decorating and writing signs and names on top of cakes. So they can test different things. History classes said there are dinosaur bones and structures in Tinkercad. You can have a broad range of subject areas in Tinkercad. You just have to think, how will it fit into my class or subject area? If you logged in, the screen may seem familiar. Don't worry about these designs here. If you make an educator's account, Tinkercad will verify it. They'll ask for your ID or letter that you work for the school. They'll verify it, and that gives you access to all of the Autodesk. The educator's account actually allows you to make classes. So you can make different classes. And then if you don't want your students to actually make accounts and log in, you can assign them dummy logins. So if you have different students, you can set up the student names, give them a login information. This you can edit and attach in. And then you can pass the students a class link whereby they can join the class without having to make their own accounts.
Firstly, what is stop frame animation? It's basically create a sequence of photos or images and you play them together in that sequence to create the illusion of motion. And it's been around for about 100 years or more, about as long as cinema has been around. And there were other similar techniques that were available even before they introduced the movies. Why do we want to use it? Basically, it's a way for students to show their learning, to revise or consolidate their learning. It can be used across a different range of topics, and it's really great for student creativity and to allow students to sort of choose their own path of what they want to do. As I say, it can be used across a lot of different subject areas, to English, storytelling, pitching, instructional texts,
You can do puppet shows. You can use it for all sorts of areas of maths. We'll give one example of that. Humanities, geography, history, etc. There's lots of different ways that you can use it there to explain topics. There's some other examples of where you can use dot frame animation. There's heaps of areas where you can use dot frame animation to explain processes in science, evolution, water cycle, mitosis, meiosis, DNA, physics, etc. This is an interesting maths one using Lego. Let me know if you can't hear it or if we need to turn up the volume.
Which states that the sum of the squares of the two perpendicular sides of the triangle equals the square of the hypotenuse. From this, we can calculate that the duck has travelled a distance of 5.6 meters. To find the duck.
So there you go. Another example, this is from geography, looking at how rivers form.
Because all it takes to turn a straight stretch of river into a bendy one is a little disturbance and a lot of time. And in nature, there's plenty of both. Say, for example, that a muskrat burrows herself a den in one bank of a stream. Her tunnels make her a cozy home, but they also weaken the bank, which eventually begins to crumble and slump into the stream.
All right. So that's an interesting one from geography, looking at rivers. So if on those slide, on that stop motion guide sheet that I gave you in the chat, it goes through 5 different steps for stop motion animation. Coming up with an idea, writing down the high level view on a storyboard, creating your scenes and figures from craft materials, animating your stop motion, and then finally editing your work, possibly in an external video editor like iMovie. And then there's materials that you need to create a stop motion.